is Helen Figge, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer for Medicasoft in Arlington, Virginia. I hold a lot of titles of academics, which is near and dear to my heart. But today we're going to have a panel of a lot of opportunities for focal points of discussion for how learning applications, such as what we'll discuss in these few sessions that are consecutively back-to-back, how can they can accelerate global change in how we approach things. So we've had a little bit of a modification of the agenda, and it's on your app, but we have the honor of hearing from Karen Tilstra about some of the activity that she has experienced in her role. And she works and is the co-founder of the Florida Hospital Innovation Lab. She has a PhD in innovation, and as you can see, as a lot of these presenters, go online, look at their bios. I don't want to spend a lot of time things that you can discover yourself. I want you to really hear from the presenters what they're doing, how you can learn from them, and maybe bring stuff back to base camp to help you in your everyday practices. So we're first going to talk about, is design thinking healthcare's new superpower? We'll have a 20-minute presentation from Karen. We're going to have 5 minutes, 7 minutes of question and answer, and then we're going to keep things moving and lively. The last thing I want to do is really get this to a dry point where people are just yawning. This is really something that you want to go home and bring it with you to make changes in your everyday practices. Karen has a PhD in innovation, she holds a PhD in innovation and leadership. She's a licensed educational psychologist. And over the past 5 years, she has co-founded several innovation labs, including the award-winning Florida Hospital Innovation Lab in Orlando, as well as Orlando Magic Innovation Lab. And she currently is helping Pioneers International develop an innovation program. That's enough about the bio. Now let's get to the core. If you want to see anything else, look her up in LinkedIn or on our links on the website. So with that, Karen?
Thank you. I'm supposed to stay here, so I like to usually drift around, but the instructions are to stay here so we can see the folks. So this is design thinking, healthcare's new superpower, we believe. And so I'm from Florida Hospital Innovation Lab, but if you know anything about Florida Hospital, they just changed their name, and it's now Advent Health Innovation Lab. So we are really Ad Hill, or A Hill, and people have a lot of fun with that. So we're from A Hill. Okay. So we keep Phil faded in the background. So, yeah, okay, so the goals today is what is design thinking, why it matters, and how design thinking can be used with lean, agile, lean and agile. And I'm not an expert really on those two, but I can tell you how they kind of blend and how we blend with them. So if you're a Six Sigma black belt, you will know more than me on these bottom ones, but we do connect with them. So quickly, I just want to take 1 second and have you look to the partner and just say one thing that you've learned up to this point, because sometimes learning is just good to kind of clarify, have you learned anything? So just take 30 seconds, look to your neighbor, tell them, or behind you, what's one thing you learned? Go. So it sounds like you guys actually have learned something Monday and Tuesday. So yeah, happy to hear that. So this was very inspiring. It sounds like you guys have learned a lot from yesterday and the day before. Good. So, okay, shared learning is always good. Keep sharing what you're learning because it inspires other people. If you learn something, they're inspired to learn it too. Okay, we're going to take a big fat quiz really quick. 2 questions. So, you are the CEO of the largest hospital in the country. The incubators keep getting fried due to electrical surges. What do? You hire the best electricians, you buy better incubators, or you go visit the poorest and most remote women in the region and ask them. Think about it. Would you take 1, 2, or 3? Have your answer in your head? Now, question 2. You're the CNO, Chief Nursing Officer, of a large hospital. Some of your nurses are making more than 11 mistakes each time they prep and distribute meds to patients. What are you going to do? The answers are fire the nurses, increase training in med distribution, or go to a restaurant supply store. Do you have your answer in your head? Okay. This is design thinking. This is the kind of questions that come up in design thinking. And the question we ask ourselves is what's really going on? What is really happening in that first one with the first question, the second question. So, did anybody answer 3? Did you go to the most remote people in the village or the region? Yes. So this is a design thinking example. There was a large hospital up in Nepal who their incubators kept blowing. $25,000 an incubator. They kept restocking them. And finally, some university students went up and said, a hospital sponsored some university students to go up and say, find out what's happening. The engineers, how can we fix these incubators? But a faculty member told them, before you start figuring out how to fix the incubators, just go hang out in the villages, go talk to the people, hang out in the tea houses. And they found, as they were hanging out in the villages, they were noticing people coming up, climbing Everest. And so, as they hung around the tea houses and saw the different hikers, they noticed they had certain types of clothing that they could unzip, take out the middle part, put it in boiling hot water, and zip it up and stay warm for 8 to 10 hours. With that information, they started getting to know different people in the villages who couldn't make it to the hospitals. They didn't have transportation, it was rugged, et cetera, et cetera. And so they started thinking, what if the incubators were not the answer? Because they can't even get to the incubators that keep getting fried. So they started thinking about the hikers. So they called back to the university and said, can you get one of those jackets, those hiking jackets, and send it to us? So they did, and they started experimenting. And they discovered, this picture right here, is they were able to make blankets for little babies for $9 a blanket, and they stay warm. And now it's an Embrace, it's a big company, it services remote places. Now, the next question about the med problem. Medical errors are a big problem for hospitals. Design thinking team got together and they went to a restaurant supply house and bought a yellow apron. Because they noticed that when the nurses were getting meds ready and distributing meds, they kept getting interrupted. Every time they got interrupted, problems happened. So they said, what if they could just send a message that this nurse is involved in giving meds? So they said, then why don't we put a yellow apron on them? So they did, and reduced med errors significantly. Now in our lab, we've had over 600 design thinking challenges come in, some very large, some very small, over the last 7 years. So some quite small, because we could do that number. But it's always about going and finding what's really going on. And that's the beauty of design thinking, actually, because it begins with empathy. And why it matters is because we can all do it. It's quite, we put data to the side to begin with. I know that's scary. People say, what? We don't use data. We just say, just put data to the side and go experience what the end user experiences. So when they went and experienced in Nepal, and they realized that most of the people couldn't even make it to the incubators, when they observed the nurses and talked to the nurses and they found out that they were being interrupted, they actually came up with relevant and rather inexpensive solutions. So that's the beauty of design thinking. So design thinking sits in the middle of the bottom of the triple bottom line for healthcare, which is increased access, improved patient experience, and lower cost. Because you're really getting out there and experiencing what the end user experiences to identify spoken and unspoken needs. So, designs, for those of you that have a familiarity with design thinking, you know this is a unique pattern, but one of our interns made this for us and said, show us how it blends together. Design thinking is really a very iterative process, and it starts with empathy, going and experiencing what the end user experiences so you can identify spoken and unspoken needs. And oftentimes the problem, which we think, going up and fixing incubators, really the problem pivoted when they found out what was really going on. And then we go to defining the real problem, not what you think the problem is, but what the real problem is. You quickly iterate different ideas that you could try out by rapidly prototyping and getting right back to your end user. So it's a fast, self-correcting process that it's very powerful on the front end. So, why design thinking matters when it comes to healthcare? Because healthcare, again, is about the triple bottom line: increasing access, lowering cost, and improving the patient experience. And you really can only do that when you connect with your end user. And a lot of solutions we have, in our lab, we have, you would know all these companies if I told you, big companies, and we have heard from them over and over and over again. Wow, if we had just connected with our end user in a real way, if we'd gone out and hung out with the end user, we wouldn't have created this device, we wouldn't have gotten this process going, we wouldn't have wasted years. And this was actually kind of surprising to me when we opened our lab and large companies started coming in. I really thought we were going to learn a lot from them, which we did, but I think they learned more from us when it came to empathy. So we just say put all data aside and just go experience with the end user experiences. So I just made a little chart quickly. So why design thinking matters is because it inspires new thinking by giving empathy. It reframes complex challenges so we can actually start to solve them. It is very iterative in ideation because it's rooted in rapid prototyping and evokes a lot of feedback. And feedback is really what drives design thinking. So we say there's no such thing as bad feedback, just feedback, because feedback is just simply information. And back in the days when ladies wore slips, there was a thing that in Reader's Digest that said, "Pardon me, your slip is showing." Do you remember that? Any of that little, it was the mistakes people made. And so when we really started studying about feedback, I thought of that Reader's Digest article because if your slip is showing and someone comes and tells you, "Whoops, your slip is showing," you're the last to know. Everyone else already knows, so you don't even need to be embarrassed because everybody already knows. It's the same thing with feedback. Oftentimes everybody knows your feedback, you're the last to know. So we say just embrace it. There's no such thing as bad feedback. And all you have to do when you get feedback is just say thank you. And then go back to rapid prototyping. And when you follow the empathy, reframing, ideation, rapid prototyping feedback loops, you actually set the pathway and open up for relevant and sustainable solutions because they're rooted in what the end user is experiencing. And the reason most people can't tell you what they need is because they really don't know. When it comes to complex challenges or challenges that, because they've created workarounds and they oftentimes don't even see what the real problem is. So by you coming in with fresh eyes and experiencing what the end user experiences, you're able to get information and insights to be able to actually articulate spoken and unspoken needs. So it's really powerful. And then what's really cool is when these happen, where that star is, it encourages others through your storytelling because design thinking stories are really compelling. If we had more time, I could tell you all kinds of interesting stories about how we came up with solutions, or we don't, the teams do, we just facilitate them through it. But one thing I've noticed in design thinking, well, probably any kind of problem solving, it's, wow, why didn't we think of that before? So I think that's kind of a thermometer on how great the idea was when people say, wow, it was right there, why didn't we think of it? But this process actually opens you up to new ways of thinking because you're experiencing what the end user experiences, you're capturing stories. And so it's really putting you outside the normal pathways of initial research. And people, then you can identify their workarounds. Because we do all kinds of things that we'll just adapt, and we don't even realize there would be a better way to do it. We actually tolerate a lot of problems, and we become blind to problem finding because we just get so used to operating in systems that might not be as effective or human-centered. And design thinking is all about the human. So now, I just want to touch on this very briefly because I know our time is very short. Design thinking is, as you can see, explores the problem. I thought this was a great little diagram. And lean is building the right things, and agile is building the thing right. So what we do, when we opened our lab, the administrators said, we do not want this design thinking lab to absolutely, in any way, talk to the process improvement people, the Six Sigma people, lean people, the agile people. We just don't want that at all. And because we had already reached out to them. And so Because, wow, that seems kind of cool. But what had happened is in healthcare, so a lot of you probably are in healthcare, they had had a history. Florida Hospital is the largest healthcare or Medicare provider in the nation, and it has, well, it has some of the largest admissions in ED. So they have had to have a very active IP or PI department. And the hospital system, people in the system, equated PI with firing. If they came around, someone's head rolling. So they wanted this design thinking lab to be really successful. So they said, for the first year, we just cannot connect the two because we've had some bad experiences. Now, that doesn't mean that the people shouldn't have been fired or that PI might have been doing a great job. It's just that it just hadn't gone well. So now, we've been going for 7 years. We actually have connected with them. And sometimes they'll send us projects for on the front end. We do a lot of empathy for them. And then if it's a complicated healthcare issue, they can do really well on the back end. So I think they all three go together well. So again, design thinking does a great job of exploring the problem. And oftentimes once you explore the problem, you find the real issue and you're able to ideate it and prototype it quickly. But sometimes on more complicated, real big challenges, lean and agile help a lot. And especially with software. And technology and IT, that kind of thing. So exploring the problem, building the right things, and then building the thing right. So what I wanted to just say a little differently, design thinking explores and solves problems, lean framework for testing beliefs and learning the right outcomes. Agile is adapting to changing conditions, scaling and evolving. And most of Agile is really focused on software, but I don't think it is all. It's just that's we just don't work a lot with that, but we have learned how to be married. And I love that. So, how might you start your design thinking journey today? So, I was just wanting to spend a few minutes on because we just covered a lot of material very rapidly, but I think we have enough to at least talk. What could you do today, leaving this session, to begin bringing design thinking into your work with your teams, in your department, even in your personal life, starting with empathy. Have any of you had any experience with design thinking up to this point? You have? You have? So just from what we covered, are you in healthcare?
No.
You are?
No, I'm not healthcare.
Not healthcare. What's just something, if you were, what you know about design thinking, if you were saying to a group, said you've tried it, what is something people could do very easily to just start in a design thinking mindset?
Well, I think it starts with design research, and that helps reduce risk in the product you're building. If research is the critical part, and it goes back to empathy and feedback. Focus on that first. The products that you build will be able to, I guess, change to the perception of what other people think it is. And you end up with products that are better related to what the community wants and what the user wants.
Right. So can you unpack research a little? Because that might be, because that's where people get a little bit disconnected. It's like research, I can't do research. I'm a nurse on the floor. Or that isn't in my job description. But can you unpack a little what you mean by research?
Well, you do user research, polls, you figure out what the actual people would want before building a product.
But,
You could go to
so for example, yeah, do you want to
I was
answer?
going to say, sometimes we a lot often we'll just start some of the meetings with just listening to customer calls. Like we'll get some of the subject matter experts together and all of a sudden they're listening to the experience members are having based on everything they've created.
Right.
And you start hearing all this, but that's not supposed to work that way. And this, and they start understanding how it's actually being received.
Right, that is a really powerful thing.
So I wouldn't call, it's research. It's not
Right,
really
we
research,
don't
but
normally
it's-
say research because it kind of freaks people out.
Yeah.
But we just experience what the end user experiences, either by story, by sitting and watching them for, like, okay, for example, we were doing a big project with doctors, how they could, it was with cardiologists, how they could improve their patient experience in cardiology at Florida Hospital. They're being rolled all around the hospital. So one doctor said, I'm just going to spend the day in a gurney being pushed around by transportation. He said within the first 5 minutes, it was humiliating, I was invisible. He passed the cafeteria, which is huge at Florida Hospital, and the transporter saw an old friend and stopped and started talking. And he said, I was just laying there in front of the cafeteria, but he said that he realized that whole day, he'd never realized that it's humiliating, people look at you, and he said it totally transformed the way the patient experienced going from the room to the surgery before they were out. And they rerouted, but he said, all these years I've been here, never thought about it. And so it's right, it's just going and experiencing what the end user experiences. So how can you do that? Very easily. It doesn't have to be ramped up research. That's where we say, put the data aside. I know we get a lot of raised eyebrows when we say that, but it's true. Just put the data aside and go find your end user, the person that uses your product, or that's experiencing the trouble, and just experience what they experience. So another example, we had a large company coming in that was working with the OR, and they had been having a lot of trouble, just their sales were falling, lots of complaints, and they came in and said, we would like to actually run a design thinking experience. How might we recreate our business model that eradicates all reps? And we said, well, we would like to encourage you to go and just experience what your end user is experiencing so you could really identify the real problem, not just what you think the problem is. So we got them in observing 3 surgeries that were using their products. And this company actually viewed themselves as way above average. They were not a cheap company by any means. So when they're there observing, they were hearing all the conversation with the operating team. And they said, this stupid company makes it so hard to connect their stuff. And one guy said, I think they do that on purpose because they want us to open and have to throw away. And then we actually, they sell more product. They came back to our lab after 3 hours and they said, we learned today more than we've learned in 10 years. And they completely changed the way they operated. And they learned from the doctors, or the way they built their products, they learned from the doctors. If it hadn't been for the reps, they would have just signed off that company a long time ago. So I'd like to encourage you to study design thinking. You look, it's all over the web. You can find all kinds of stuff on it. And just see how you might just do the simple thing of experiencing what your end user experiences. You'll be amazed at the difference that makes. It doesn't cost any money. It takes a little time, but it also brings a lot of truth to you. So that is design thinking. I'm from Florida Hospital Innovation Lab. My name is Karen Tilstra. Look us up, come visit us. We're having a tour on Friday. You're all welcome to come.
So regardless of what we do in our day-to-day lives, we all, at some point, we all use the system. So I think Karen's point, like I found that very interesting, the simple things that we can do to help out healthcare. We're seeing more and more. Never before in the history of healthcare have we had so much technology. Everybody's monitoring everything. Sit on a park bench. Watch all the people walk by and see how perceived healthy they are or aren't. That is really a sad statement when we have infused so much touch points into technology, yet is it practical technology? Are you a diabetic who, and I was a diabetic educator in a previous life, said not to eat a donut, but it's Saturday and I'm going to cheat on the donut. How do we get people to care about their own health? All of the gadgets in the world are not going to do it. So we are infusing, whether it be vendors, we're trying to figure out a way to get someone to care about their health care, when in fact it comes from within. The billion-dollar question in healthcare, and I say this to every vendor, every person. I am a mentor in the MIT labs in Cambridge. How do you get someone to care about themselves? Because what motivates me may not motivate you. You tell me I got to lose weight because I'm going to have a heart attack when I'm 50. Well, if I'm 22, I may not even live till I'm 50. I may get eaten by a shark in the Caribbean. So it's all of those factors, and I think it feeds into what Karen is saying of the practicality of approaching this. In healthcare also, we're going to see, and we're seeing more and more best practices coming from outside of healthcare, because we didn't get it right. And nurses create workarounds. Doctors are overwhelmed by clicks of an EHR. After 2 clicks, they're tired, okay? But if you've got a criteria of seeing 38 patients in a day just to meet your quota, and the insurance company is only paying you for so much. Think of all the bureaucracy behind that. And I think that is what's healthcare turned into. So we're seeing people coming from, you know, we hired somebody as a line manager implementing an EHR when I worked at Allscripts. They were the #1 manager of a McDonald's in Maine, in all of the United States, because they were able to move the fastest number of clients, sold the most number of hamburgers, and had the least amount of complaints. How did they do that? They used those same characteristics of themselves and those same thoughts, put it in a hospital setting, a major hospital setting, and created the workflow for one of the busiest departments in the emergency room flawlessly. So we're looking at things. So the practical sense of, don't think so high that you need a technology degree to do it. It's the practical sense of having an orange apron to say, stay away from me, I'm doing something serious. We're feeding into our human side, and that's where I hope healthcare is going to be. Because us creating technology, Apple Watches and all that, we're trying to create things, and we're going to go through this over the day, creating things for seniors to remember to do things. Well, my dad was a senior, and he would just shut the computer down and say, well, they're watching me, so I got to do this behind the computer. It's human nature. How do we get to it? That's going to be the success of healthcare, not all the technology we're investing in. So we have enough technology. Now we've got to invest in people like Karen and programs like Karen to say, okay, how do we get to human nature? And I want to leave you with one point in healthcare. Regardless of where we are in the world, we all get the same diseases, some more exotic than others. But there's one commonality among all of us wherever we are in the world. We all age the same. And that's very important because by the year 2020, there will be more 65-year-old individuals than 5 years old and less. So we're aging and we're all moving together. We see Jennifer Lopez, age 50, hotter than ever. Tom Brady playing till the age of 45. We're seeing all these people we're getting gender neutral and age neutral. And that's what I'm going to talk about later on. So we got to get healthcare to that same mentality. We've got to be able to not have people have not the ability to buy an Apple Watch, or they're not going to live as long as someone who has the fortunate success of having one. It all invests into things that Karen's doing. It's the simple human things that can make a difference. That really, I don't think, does it cost a lot of money to do?
Well,
Karen?
actually, some of the projects we've done, that's why I said it's surprising when people say, why didn't we think of this before? That to me is a good thermometer of a good solution. But yeah, design thinking is low cost, rapid cycle, so low res solutions or low res examples of your solutions to get out and just test.
Yeah.
And we're talking very low res. Pipe cleaners, so end users can get an idea what you're doing, and so you don't spend any money, any big money, until you actually are well down.
Yeah.
In fact, that company I told you about with the devices, they came back in the shoe boxes to show a prototype that actually led them forward.
And let me point one more point, and then we're going to break for lunch. If anyone can't sleep at night and you turn on QVC at 3 a.m. and you see all these stupid ads for $19.99 and all of those, these are things that humans really can use in practical sense, right? Look at the industry. The youngest billionaire today is a Kardashian. I saw this when driving to the airport. Literally, why? She invested in lipstick. Every woman in the world wants a lipstick. Same thing with socks. If you look at what people need and want and the basic fundamentals, if you want to be a billionaire, find something that everybody can use regardless of their economic status. It's the yearn to want something. Not everybody wants a Mercedes, so that's great, but everybody needs a car. So what invention in a car does everybody need? Of course, a windshield washer. You don't think of things like that. Same principles got to apply to healthcare. We don't need more junk. We need more practical sense. And I feed that as a success to Karen's testament to her thing. So with that being said, I want to thank you. We have our next, anybody has any questions for Karen? Here's her information. She's going to stay here a little while. We have a lunch meet and greet that I have to go to unfortunately, but come back. The schedule has changed, so I think our next one is coming up, not the next session, but one after that. But check your app because Leah said it's updated. Okay? Thank you, everyone.